Your voice, your opinion, your community. Fact TV, free speech protected.
Morning, Bellows Falls, and welcome to the feed. I'm Mike Smith. This is Marty Gallagher. It's February 3rd. We've made it past Groundhog Day. Halfway through winter, so it's good. The groundhog virtually saw its shadow, I heard. There wasn't really a real shadow, it was a virtual, because this is COVID and a whole new deal.
He had a little mask on.
Yeah, he didn't have a mask on.
He did have a mask on.
He did not. You're making that up. But he was
a
virtual shadow, I heard. Anyway, Marty, can we have some local events?
Yeah, we have a free-for-all chicken meal supper. It's happening on Saturday, February 6th. That's this Saturday. It's available at Busy Bees. It's hosted by the First Baptist Church. So it's a take-home meal on Saturday from 1 to 4. You can go into Busy Bees. It's first come, first serve. It is roasted chicken thighs, mashed potato, gravy, carrots, green bean casserole, cookies and brownies. So from 1 to 4, show up at Busy Bees, and you can have your dinner.
Yeah, that sounds pretty good. Free.
It does. Free.
Yeah.
Free. Well, things
Check
else.
that one out, yeah.
And just to remind everybody that tickets are still on sale for the Friends of Rockingham Libraries raffle. They're on sale till the 12th, and you can pick them up at the Village Square Bookseller if you want to pick them up in person. You can pick them up curbside at the library if you call and let them know, or you can buy them online at rockinghamlibrary.org. So remember, the tickets are $20. They're only selling 200 of them. First prize is $1,000, second prize is $500, and third and fourth prizes are $250. So you get a chance to win cash.
That's great. Okay. For today's guest, we have a special guest, familiar to some of us, but actually should be familiar to most of us, Sue Hammond, who lives in Bartonsville. But we're going to talk today about a project that she's been working on for, 18 years? Quite a few years now. Marty, you want to?
Yeah, Sue's the executive director and the founder of War Legacies Project. So Sue, we were talking beforehand, and it's kind of an interesting story. How did you become the founder and executive director of War Legacies Project?
Yeah, well, it was kind of a long way in coming, but in 1991, I traveled to Vietnam for the first time with my sister, and I just fell in love with the country. I knew that I needed to go back somehow and continue to work there, but coming back, it took a while. I went to grad school. And then in 1995, I started working for another organization called the Fund for Reconciliation and Development that was working on normalizing relations between the U.S., Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia after the war. As some people may remember, we had a diplomatic and trade embargo against Vietnam, and so relations were very poor. And I worked for that organization for almost 10 years, living in New York, in Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam during that time. And after relations started to normalize, I began to really focus on what hadn't been accomplished yet, and that was addressing the war legacy issues, both unexploded ordnance as well as what I primarily work on now, which is the impacts on the environment and human health of the Agent Orange that was sprayed in Laos, Vietnam, and parts of Cambodia. So I moved back home in 2007 and started up the War Legacies Project.
Nice. So can you talk a little bit more about the unexploded, what did you call them?
Unexploded ordnance.
Unexploded ordnance. Yeah, as many of you may know, we dropped more bombs on Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia during that 10-year war than we did in all of World War II, probably even World War I combined. They're the most, Laos in particular is the most bombed country per capita. And not all of them exploded, particularly something called cluster munitions, which were small bombies that are about the size of a tennis ball that are inside what they call a mother bomb, and there would be several thousands of those little cluster munitions inside a larger bomb that was dropped, and they were supposed to explode on impact. They're really anti-mine bombs or anti-personnel bombs, and most of them, about I forget the percentage, but something around 15 or 20% did not explode. And so there are millions of these tiny little cluster bombs spread throughout Laos, Vietnam, and parts of Cambodia. And Cambodia also has the added problem of landmines that were left during the KR period.
Right.
Wow.
And cluster bombs were so bad that they actually were banned by the Geneva Convention after the Vietnam War, because they were just proved to be so destructive to just I mean, there was no, they were just inhumane. They did, like you said, they didn't blow up, and the damage they caused.
There has been, just like there was a landmine treaty convention, there's a cluster bombs convention, but of course the U.S. hasn't signed on to either one of those. So the U.S. is still, we're not manufacturing necessarily many these days, but we could still use them if we were to go to war, and we have given them to countries like Yemen. I mean, to use in Yemen.
Yeah.
Should we go through?
So they have gone away.
Yeah, they stay forever. We have a slideshow, and we were hoping that we could start the slideshow, and then you could speak to some of the slides, unless you would like to talk a little bit more about how your organization works, where it's headquartered, and how people might get in contact, in case we get too far into the weeds here.
Yeah, I mean, primarily what I focus on now, I mean, I do work on the unexploded ordnance, but on advocacy, so encouraging the U.S. government to spend more money to clean up the mess they left behind. But primarily my work with direct people in Vietnam and Laos is those who we believe have been affected by Agent Orange. So those are the science is still pretty controversial. We know that veterans, if you are a veteran who served in Vietnam during the war, you are eligible for VA benefits for a certain number of cancers and other diseases like Parkinson's, type 2 diabetes. But if you're a child of a Vietnam veteran, you're only allowed to receive benefits if you have spinal bifida. So there's a lot of debate over what Agent Orange does to the reproductive cycle, and does it cause birth defects? In all animal studies, we find that it does cause birth defects. So in my mind, it's not a big leap to say that some of these birth defects that I see at much higher rates in the parts of the country of Laos and Cambodia that were sprayed with these herbicides, when you see higher rates of birth defects in that part of the country as opposed to other parts, you have to think there's got to be some connection to the herbicides that were used. And it's also, you have to remember that this happened for 10 years. And in addition, these herbicides not only were targeting the trees, they targeted the food source. So we cause a lot of malnutrition in these countries as well. So there's problems on top of problems. So my main work in the region is addressing the environmental and health impacts of Agent Orange, and also to encourage the U.S. government to spend more money to help pick up that mess. Mm-hmm. And thankfully, we have a great senator, Senator Leahy, who agrees with that and has been ensuring that funding is going at least to Vietnam to clean up the areas on the former military bases where these herbicides were stored that caused huge dioxin hotspots, so Superfund sites, basically. And so the U.S. has been funding that cleanup, and also spending money to help, at least in Vietnam, the communities where there are high rates of birth defects and disabilities, and helping improve the conditions and the healthcare for those areas. So yeah, we can go on to the slide.
Okay.
Joe, if you
let's see if we can get the slideshow fired up, and then you can speak to the slides as they go along.
Yep. This is our website, so if you want to know any more information, this is a website just on Agent Orange. We have two websites. One talks about our organization, the other one about Agent Orange in particular. So there's information here for veterans, children of veterans, as well as people interested in the problems overseas. These are spray planes of Agent Orange. There was over 20 million gallons of herbicide sprayed throughout Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and this is the type of destruction it caused during the time. You can still see the areas that were destroyed, where the trees were completely destroyed. This is a photo from 1975, and that little boy in the photo ended up getting very sick and dying of after 20 years from he played in the areas that were heavily sprayed. This is Laos. You can still see the lower where it's a lighter green. That's defoliation to this day, 50 years after the spraying. The trees do not naturally regenerate. You'd have to plant them. And this is just a village in Laos, just to get people a sense of where I work in Laos is along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. If people remember what that was, it actually went through Laos. That's where the North Vietnamese would bring troops and supplies down into the south to fight against the Americans and the South Vietnamese. And so this is a village right smack in the middle of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And it's very poor to this day. They're farmers who plant rice and vegetables, usually in those high mountains. And the stories I hear from the people during the war are incredible. I mean, they lived in those hillsides for 10 years because of the daily bombing. This is a traffic jam on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And it's the children that I tend to work with now. Even we're finding multi-generational impacts of these herbicides that are used. And it's a complicated story, but what happens is the dioxin is believed to affect the epigenetics of our genes. And so basically, it acts like a protein. And when that protein is telling your body to turn on the gene that's supposed to make your arms, it doesn't. And so that's why we believe we're seeing birth defects. So it's the dioxin is not allowing the normal development process to proceed in the human body. But we're still learning more every day. I just thought this was a cute photo of some kids in the village. It's to ease you into some of the photos of the children that I work with who have severe disabilities. This is an interesting village. We can go back to that for a second. Those barrels, this is a village on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and those are fuel barrels from the war that have become a fence for the thing. Those were the North Vietnamese army used this village as a storage site. For the fuel that they needed to fuel their trucks as they were going down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And the Lao are very creative in how they use the war materials, both the left by the Vietnamese, like these barrels, but also the airplane parts and the bombs that were dropped. I think there's some photos of that later on in the slideshow as well. Like that's a rice storage, you can't really see, but the holding up that are mother bombs. And that's a mother bomb, that's a planter. So, and some of the buckets are reused. That's a bomb crater. And so this area where I work in the Ho Chi Minh Trail, every village just has hundreds of these bomb craters. And a lot of them they use as fish ponds these days. This is just some more scenes of, this is Vietnam actually. So this is, it was an agricultural country that we completely bombed and sprayed tons of herbicides over. This is some of my colleagues in Laos. That's also, it's a fuel tank from a plane that is, an American plane that is being used as a boat to cross the river. We have to go through some pretty treacherous travel. I mean, a lot of the roads are not yet developed in this region. So there are times where I'm driving through rivers, not realizing after I crossed the river, I should have probably been a little bit more careful to make sure one of the bombies did not roll down in the last rainstorm. It can be, I mean, it's not super dangerous, but you have to be really careful and aware of where you're going. Another traffic jam, this is in Vietnam, so it's a lot of trudging across rice paddies to get to villages, because I work with the rural families, rural agricultural families. And what I do is I go meet the families, and these are people in Vietnam. We work with the Vietnam Red Cross, who introduced us to the families who have children with severe disabilities that could be related to Agent Orange, and they are usually extremely poor. So we go in and we find out, is there anything medically we can help the child with, or physical therapy? Are there, and in most cases, it's too late. The intervention that could have possibly been done for some of these children, they just didn't happen at an earlier age. So they've reached, or their disability was so severe that any medical intervention wasn't going to help. So then we focus on the family. So how can we make the lives of these families easier? And so often what that means is we're providing income support for them. Some way to help them improve their income, so that if they have that, I mean, many of their children have huge medical issues, so if they need to get that child to a doctor, and they don't have cash, because most of them are not on a cash economy, then we help provide some type of income so that they can have that. So usually it's in the form, if they're a rural farming family, it's in the form of livestock. It could be cows, it could be pigs, chickens, something that they can raise, that they can have that investment. And if they need to sell that calf to meet a medical need or to improve their housing, then they have that. We also help a school in Vietnam that does early intervention, physical therapy, as well as preschool education for children with cognitive and physical disabilities. This is a woman that we help provide a well for. She has she has a sad personal story, but anyway, she has a child with a severe disability, and she used to have to walk a mile every day. In fact, we went to her first to offer her, a pig or a cow, and she said, "How can I feed a cow or water a cow or a pig? I've got to walk a mile every day to get to water." And so we thought, well, I guess what you really need is a well. And so we helped her dig that. Well, we didn't physically help, but we provided the resources so that she could get a well dug. And the interesting thing about her is that her neighbors also had to walk that same mile. And though she was seen kind of as a charity case for the neighborhood because she was poor and, they would help her out, in the end, she ended up helping out all of her neighbors because they no longer had to make that mile walk. They shared the well, and the neighbor provided the electricity for the water pump. And so she became a more integral part of her little community. And in Laos, what we're doing is we're going village to village along the Ho Chi Minh Trail and trying to identify children with severe disabilities, because at this point, there are no other organizations work in this region. I mean, it's only within the last, I would say, 5 years that roads were available to some of these communities. In part, that was, sadly, the roads were built for the logging industry to pull out all the valuable timber. But after that, the government went in and fixed up the roads so you can now get to communities. So this is a young girl named Yen who was born with a severe condition where her arms and her legs and her joints are all out of whack. And when we first met her, she was so skinny, and she was surviving on rice and red pepper. That's all she ate. Because sadly, in her family, she didn't think she was going to survive. So the ones who were able to go to the field to do the agriculture or go to the woods to do hunting, they got the food first, and when it came down to her, she got what was left. But we were able to get her to Vientiane, the capital city of Laos, and get her medical care so that she could improve her ability to walk and get her vocational training. And now she lives in Ho Chi Minh City, in Vientiane, and she's married to a nice young man who's and she's trying to make a young life together with this young man. So, and then another sad thing in Laos in particular is because these were remote villages, something like a cleft lip that this girl was born with, is not addressed. I mean, most children, even in Vietnam, most babies after birth would have that as soon as they could, surgery in order to correct that problem. And so this young girl, her name was Cleft Lip in her local language. That's what she was known by, instead of her real name, which is Na. And so we were able to get her to Vientiane to correct that very minor thing that can be corrected very easily by Lao doctors. But her family didn't have the $100 that was required to get her from her village to the city to have that surgery. So we help out in that case.
Nice.
So, Sue, it's tragic and heartbreaking, but we have about 5 minutes left. Can you tell us how people can contact the organization and find out more and maybe contribute to the organization? And also, I understand there's a New York Times article coming up. If you could talk to that.
I worked with a New York Times writer. Well, he's a freelancer actually, and he. The story about how Agent Orange was used in Vietnam is pretty well known. Very few people realize that it was also used in Laos. And so he went with me, it was 2018, to these villages where I work along the Ho Chi Minh Trail to write a story about how Laos was also affected, and writes about our work in this region. And that article is supposed to be coming out in the New York Times Sunday magazine on March 7th. Yeah, I'm trying to think of what that day is on Sunday. It'll be online too prior to that. So that's pretty exciting. For anyone to get in the New York Times is pretty exciting, but to have our work profiled there. So people can go to our website. This is the War Legacies Project is the name of the organization, so warlegacies.org. If you Google us, hopefully you'll find us. We've just revamped our website, so it might take a while for Google to catch up with those changes, but warlegacies.org is the name of the website. We also, and through that you can find out more about our work and how to donate if you'd like to. We're lucky that we have some angel donors who were volunteers in Vietnam during the war with something called the International Voluntary Service. And they have a small family foundation that covers my expenses when I travel and go to Vietnam. It covers my administrative costs. So any donations that we get for our work go directly to program. There's no administrative costs taken off the top. And so the money would go to help a family in Vietnam. It could be in the form of raising livestock, scholarships for the children in the family who are able to go to school because they will become the caregivers of their siblings when their parents die. So we want to make sure they have a good education and a good future. Could be fixing up someone's house that's in poor condition, providing a well or sanitary, bathroom. In Vietnam, a little bit of medical care, but not as much. In Laos, our work is, as I said, is primarily getting these children who were unable to have the medical care they needed early on to the right places in Laos to get the medical care and the surgeries or the rehabilitation, the wheelchairs, or the other anything they need medically.
Nice. I just wanted to kind of throw a powerful quote out that was on your website. It's actually not the one I mentioned at first, but war does not end on the battlefield. War and its legacy of destruction, death, and sickness lives on in succeeding generations who had nothing to do with the war but pay its heaviest price. I think that's a powerful, powerful thought.
It is. And when I first started the War Legacies Project, I really kind of thought that addressing the war in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia would be just part of my work because the U.S. is at war in other places. But I quickly found that there is so much more that needs to be done, even in a war that's been over for almost 50 years. so much more work that needs to be done. And also that legacy is not just in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, but it's in the children of Vietnam veterans here in the US. So some of our work is also working with children of Vietnam veterans who have disabilities that they believe are caused by Agent Orange or illnesses, because dioxin is also believed to affect the immune system. And so children, particularly now, children of Vietnam veterans are very worried about COVID because they have already compromised immune systems. So the work is on both sides of the ocean, here in the US as well as in overseas. And the legacies continue for generations.
Well, thank you for your work, and that's
all the
all
time,
the
all we have
time
time for.
Well, thank you for
I'd
having
love to
me.
have you on again, and we could talk in depth about some other things. It's just you sort of scratched the surface. Thank you again.
Thanks,
And
Sue.
That's
Thank
it.
you so much.
All right. And then
Bye,
that's
community.
Bye, community. We'll see you next week.
Next week.